The lymphatic system has an interesting relationship with pressure, and that's pressure inside and around it. Whether we're talking about the lymphatic capillaries, the lymphatic vessels, or the lymph nodes, each of these things is responsive to pressure, changes to the pressure around it. And this does mean something. In the lymph capillaries, which I've drawn here, because we have a series of overlapping tissues, because these parts overlap, they form a valve system, and it's a relatively easy to use valve system. When the pressure is low, it means that the valve system is not as open. When the pressure increases, and that's going to be the result of increased interstitial fluid, the fluid that will eventually become lymphatic fluid, when that starts to increase, it forces the valves open, or it forces a larger space between the overlapping tissues of the lymphatic capillaries. And this just means, in a really easy way, an easy to understand way, and an easy to build way, in fact, that more fluid gets in to those lymph capillaries to be taken away. And this is great because it's very appropriate, and it's also cheap to run. It doesn't require nerve energy to get this to happen, so there's not a lot of waste in this system. Now, that being said, the only way this really works is if the pressure on the outside is greater than the pressure on the inside. We have to have a lower pressure inside the lymph capillaries so that we have space to allow fluid into the capillaries. We have to be unequal. And this just means the water can find the pathway of least resistance. Water is very good at that. But it also works all the way up, the whole way back to the system. So those lymph capillaries are going to combine together with a whole bunch of different other capillaries. They're all going to converge, of course, as they always do. And then they will become major trunks combining together, splitting apart too. Eventually, they're going to end up going back to the venous system first. That's our major contributor. And then all the way back to the heart. And that excess fluid that's really needed to power this, we do need an excess for there to be a true need for this major lymphatic return. It'll end up back in the heart, from the heart to the kidneys, and hopefully we can get rid of it after that. Now, along this pathway, there's many divergences and convergences. So it's actually going to split apart, and it might split into a separate vessel and into a node and then into another vessel. There's a fair amount of offshoots laterally in this system. Many, and this helps to ensure a consistent flow and a balance in pressure. And this is very important. It has to be as balanced as possible. So we've got all these, and this doesn't really do it justice. It's not bad. It's not a terrible picture, but there's lots of nodes and lots of vessels converging off even a major trunk. There's lots of variance in this. But even though there is that difference, even though there's all these, offshoots going all kinds of different ways, there's still a general pathway back, whether we're talking the right arm, the left arm, the right leg, the left leg, or through the trunk, there's still a general path for this lymphatic fluid and these lymphatic vessels and nodes and capillaries, a general way they travel. And what this means is that if we put pressure at the top of it, what we would call the proximal area, if we put a good deal of pressure somewhere more central, by whatever means, that pressure will resist fluid flow all the way back to the local or distal areas. The proximal will displace that pressure to the distal. Now, it'll be displacing it through a number of different pathways, so it will be diffuse. It will balance that pressure relatively well. But as we increase the central pressure, we actually increase the local pressure. So that goes up even down to lymph capillaries. And it's minimal, but it's significant. And if that lymph capillaries infusion of fluid is dependent on a difference in pressure, we're starting to disturb that. We're starting to make that less possible. So what this means is to really effectively clear lymph from a tissue, from a local site where it's excess, we have to ensure that the flow of that lymphatic fluid is good all along the chain. For optimal local drainage, all of the higher points have to be cleared for there to be effective drainage really throughout the system. To do this, lymph is actually active. This is not commonly known, I would say. This is, a bit of a misconception that lymph is this very passive thing. So we've got to ensure that lymph flows throughout the system, and it does a good job of that, on its own, both through internal and external means. So the lymph vessels will actually have muscles lining them all throughout, a good deal of muscles. Now, by comparison, just so nobody freaks out, it's not nearly as much as an artery or an arteriole, but it's still muscle along the vessels, and it runs through all these vessels here. And those muscles work in a coordinated way to best ensure that it squeezes that lymphatic through, and it does so in conjunction, in a coordinated way, with the lymphatic valve system. So there will be valves in this system too. So as we start to break into smaller parts, I think I can do a little bit better than that on color. Let's go a little more yellow. Anyways, as we start to break into different systems, you'll notice there's one-way valves, very much like a vein. And there's lots more than I'm drawing, of course. This is neither to scale nor purely accurate. But the valves will ensure flow in the right direction. So when the muscle squeezes it, it pushes that lymphatic fluid through. And should there be pressure backwards, the lymph system, like any other valve system, will slam those valves shut. It will prevent the backflow, such that when it's ready, when it can be squeezed in the opposite direction, the correct direction, it makes it through the proper way. This is good. This is very important. Those muscles are coordinated by the sympathetic nervous system. We can talk a bit about stress and that kind of thing and how that's important to this. But as well, there's something else that controls lymphatic flow, and it happens to be the musculature, the skeletal muscles around the lymphatic fluid that help it to flow. So there might be a large, a little bit bigger than that. There we go, brush size, there we go. There might be a large muscle in around the area, and there should be. You'll notice that most lymphatics have muscles that kind of wrap around them, or the other way around, depending on how you look at it. But there's always a relationship there. But then, as well, we can look at the fascia, or at least the connective tissue that surrounds all these things. So these will all be wrapped together. Size is a little bit skewed here, but these will all be wrapped together in a combined fascia. There's usually a nerve and an artery and a vein too, along with the muscle and the fascia, but they all run together and they all work together. And so when that muscle changes in size, it contracts, it either gets, bigger, or, as it stops contracting, it gets relatively smaller. It changes the pressure on the lymph. Same as when, say, there's a bone in the area. Of course, there almost always will be, and that muscle is pulling on the bone, and we get a spin in the tissue. We get some kind of a turning of that tissue. We get changes in tension throughout the connective tissue and the muscle, and a movement of the bone. And this in the same way actually helps, along with the valves, the lymphatic system, and making better coordination of the muscles of the lymphatic system. It actually helps to ensure lymphatic flow. And, depending on the source you look at, it's about up to a third of the lymphatic flow is driven by these outside mechanisms. Now, a very important thing is that it's in an on-off manner. It's not just pressure on that helps lymph flow. It's actually increasing in pressure and decreasing pressure. Both of these things are needed in the connective tissue and the muscles and the changing positions of bone. It's on pressure and off pressure that's really needed to assist the lymphatic system in moving through at all points along it. If you stop the movement, you don't have as good lymph flow. If you stop body movement, you don't have as good lymphatic flow. So, a lymph system really does have to be moving at all points for any local tissue to be drained as effective as it possibly can. And in addition to that, the body has to be moving around it to drain as effectively as it possibly can. This helps the lymphatic system function as best as possible, and we're always looking for optimal function. So if you happen to know someone who knows how to get your body moving better, that'd probably be a good thing for you.